Hey everyone, welcome to season 7 of the show. We used to be called Unlearning Youth Group, but today is our first ever episode under our new name, Tension. We're a podcast that acknowledges that most of life and faith is lived in the tension between the two extremes. On this show, we're going to take a look at what many of us were taught growing up in evangelical churches. We're going to weigh that against what our current culture is saying, and then we're going to try to find what Jesus has for us in the tension between the two. If we haven't met, my name is Jonathan Curl, and we're joined, as always, by our co-host, Mr. Eric Williams. Eric, go ahead and say hey to the people.
Hey, this is can we put ourselves on the level of like Prince? Do you remember Prince went from like Prince to the artist formerly
We're
known as
not going by
Prince
just a symbol, though.
to just the symbol? And then wasn't it like a Puff Daddy thing too? Or it was like Puff Daddy and then Sean Puffy Combs and P Diddy and then
And then Diddy.
is that and then Diddy and then I don't know, did he have a symbol or something?
If we change our name again, we're going to be done. It's
Yeah, I
kind of
think
where
so.
it's kind of where I think about it. If we figure out a third way to do this, we're just going to be done.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah, but I think it more aligns with the direction that we need to go. Because I think for the longtime listeners, Unlearning Youth Group, that became a little bit more insider language as opposed to, because I would have people telling me about, oh yeah, Eric is doing that youth group podcast. Like, no, it's not really a youth group podcast. It's more about some of the issues that we struggle with faith, and so it was just kind of a natural transition anyway.
Yep. We can only talk about unlearning for so long, and plus, it limited who we talk about this in the episode where we told you guys we were changing the show name, but that name just limited us to who would listen. So
Yep.
hopefully, if this is your first time listening to us because the old name didn't make sense, but the new name you're interested in, hey, welcome to the show.
Yep. Yep.
Hopefully you will enjoy it and go back and listen to the old stuff if you do. But
And
today we are kicking off
before we do, hold on. I think this might be a new record for the earliest that we mention this, but to go along with the name, as you know, as marketers, as Jonathan and I are, it creates that additional confusion. And that's why there's this need to be very obvious with certain things so that way people don't assume something wrong. And I think that transitions very well to the conversation that we're having today. Whereas these names and these labels and this stuff that all of a sudden you say it and it immediately has a different meaning in the minds of others. And we've talked about it from past seasons when you say things like CRT or woke or I don't know, some of these other, even purity culture, those sorts of things have a different connotation based on your previously held beliefs and biases. So I'll give you the good solid setup for you, Jonathan, to talk about this week's topic.
Thanks for the fastball down the middle. To do the housekeeping, today we're kicking off a new season, and our new format is a little different than what we've done before. For our new format, we're going to briefly look at and give a quick overview of each side of the tension we're talking about every single week. But most weeks, we're going to spend most of our time talking about how we live in the tension between the two. And today's topic is the tension between deconstruction and deconversion, because as we mentioned at the end of last season, there is a deconstruction to deconversion pipeline. And we want you to deconstruct or unlearn parts of your faith that are not healthy or took on a life on their own in evangelical spaces, but we don't want you to deconvert. So today we're going to spend time, we'll talk a little bit about what deconstruction is, where that's led to with deconversion. And then at the end, we're going to spend most of our time talking about how we live in the tension between the two. But
At least
before
that's
we
the
get
plan. But if you've heard this before, I mean, that's the
started,
plan. Who knows what we're going to talk about? There might be a soapbox. There might be a Jerry Falwell Jr. story. There might be a crazy liberty thing. We might bring friend of the show or, friend of the podcast, Mark Driscoll on. Who knows?
if you are a longtime listener, you will know what to expect when I say this.
There you go.
I wrote the outline this week. Eric put in no notes. So
No
this is a
notes.
no notes
10,
Eric week. So
10 out of 10.
I have no clue what Eric is going to say. I know where I'm going
Yeah.
to try to drive the show,
Yeah.
but I don't know where Eric is going to take the show as he
Yeah.
grabs the steering wheel and goes where he wants.
Yeah.
So,
and I would say if you're a first time listener, but you're a long time, friend or acquaintance of Eric, you also know what to expect at this point. Okay, let's go. I'm ready.
all right, let's kick off with deconstruction, because we need to define our terms and let you know what we're talking about so that we're all on the same page moving forward. We did do 2 episodes on deconstruction back in season 3, if you want a more in-depth look at the idea of deconstruction and what our perspective is on that. But the idea of deconstruction comes from a book by I want to butcher this name, but Jacques Derrida in 1967 called Of Grammatology. When explaining the idea of deconstruction outside of the book, he was quoted saying, "That is what deconstruction is made of. Not the mixture, but the tension between memory, fidelity, the preservation of something that has been given to us, and at the same time, something absolutely new." And that's where deconstruction started. People asking the question, did the Bible really say that? Or, sometimes asked differently, did evangelicalism interpret this writing correctly, or was it interpreted through a lens of controlling others and asserting power?
Yeah, and it's not just a religious term either. I mean, that would be the thing is if
Correct.
you put it in the mindset of like we are going to reduce everything down to its essential parts. So if you think about from engineering or you think about, just in your logical space, what are the times when you get stuck in a situation or you get stuck in a problem or, if you're a car guy or if you're, the opposite of me, you like to work with your hands and figure out stuff. I've got like dainty computer hands here, as you could tell. These are texting thumbs. These are not mechanics thumbs if you're watching on YouTube. But like when you hit a problem, my understanding is that like you break it down to its component parts. You back up and we say, okay, let's go back and let's explore how we got here. Let's explore some of the things that are leading up to it because maybe we added a step here that we shouldn't have. Uh, for instance, my oldest son, super into Lego. Like he just loves Lego to the point where I say Lego and not Legos, right? He loves
I was
Lego.
going to point out that you're like, I don't know if that's pretentious or if I'm
Mm,
impressed that you're saying Lego instead of Legos.
that's how into it we are. But anyway, so he
Pretentious.
will follow well, probably he will follow the instructions, or as he calls them, constructions, and we'll go through the process. And at some point, he'll say, "I don't know what I'm, like, Dad, can you help me? Because I'm not sure here." And what I have to do is I have to deconstruct that piece. I have to go back because he's inevitably skipped a step or he's added a step or he's put something in there wrong. And so if you're on step, 68, now I'm going back and I'm 67, 66, 65, 64 until I find where we were right. Maybe that was step 52 and then figure out what did we miss or what did we add in. And so what I hope is for those of you that are already like you heard Jonathan say, yeah, we want you to deconstruct, and you're like, I'm out of here, and you're just like thumping your Bible, being your, reformed self and gonna go smell your tulips or something like that. It's like, just come on back, listen up, and realize that when we talk about deconstruction, that's what we mean is we've gone a little too far. We got to check the GPS, we got to check the instructions, we got to come back and go, are we on the right path? Because you might end up going, yeah, we did everything right, everything is fine, but like deconstruction is not some new terminology that's in religious, religiously progressive circles. It's a concept that very well and you live in your daily life.
Well, and not just something went wrong, but you get to a point where you're like, I believe this thing, but I don't know why.
Mm-hmm.
So you go back and you're like, okay, I was told I'm supposed to believe this because of this, but I don't know if that actually goes together. And so
Yeah.
you go back and you're trying to find it. And I did this myself. I Before people started calling it deconstruction, it was after my time on church staff, so it was almost a decade ago. I said that I was going through a time where I rethought everything I thought I knew. And I went back and I weighed many of the things that I said I believed with what I knew I believed, and try to say, do these things line up with each other, or have I pulled in different pieces of culture and combined them all together? And what I found was that some beliefs were confirmed,
Mm-hmm.
some beliefs flipped completely, some beliefs I became much more open handed on, and some applications changed based off of the foundation of the belief being stronger. And it's like, oh, I actually believe this, and if I believe this, that means this other thing that I have been applying it to can't jive with this. So I've got to change this thing over here if this is what I say I actually believe. And that was a good and healthy thing for me to go through and for me to process, because we talk about making your faith your own. And I think so many of us, especially in the Bible Belt, we grew up in church in the South we were told we're supposed to believe this, and we never
Mhm.
did the work to determine, do we actually believe this and why do we believe it? So when you finally get to that, especially if you're older in your 30s and 40s and 50s, that's a much messier process than if you do it at a younger age. And where deconstruction kind of started to gain traction was the lead up to the 2016 elections. And then it came to a crescendo during the past president, and then even bigger in COVID, because there was a disconnect between what many of us were taught about the Bible and the actions we saw from people a generation or two ahead of us. And so we started asking the question, like, are we supposed to be doing this? Like, is that what we're supposed to be doing? Is that what Christianity looks like? Or what does the Bible actually say?
Yeah, and I think so. If we go to the analogy of a GPS or of traveling somewhere, I live in the Southwest. There's a lot of hiking trails. We go hiking all the time, and like you get on all trails, or you get on the map, or whatever, and or if you're driving and you find yourself in a spot where all of a sudden you got to a spot where it's like I don't recognize what's going on, and you kind of like there's little alarm bells going like, am I going the right way? And even if you are going the right way, sometimes you get that spot where you're like, am I don't recognize anything around here. You get that weird, odd sense of like, I don't know, not deja vu, but the opposite of deja vu. Like I've never seen this before, right? Vuja day. Did we just make that up? The opposite of deja vu?
Stop.
Vuja.
No,
Okay,
no,
all right,
just keep going.
great.
Keep going.
So anyway, so you get to a spot and you're like, I don't think we're going the right way, or I don't recognize this. Let's check the map. Let's check the GPS. And I think you're right. So we get in the lead up to the election, and all of a sudden you have evangelical leaders, which we have heard for years and trusted their spiritual teachings and biblical leadership, and then all of a sudden it's like they are lockstep with a certain political party, and you're going, whoa. Some people anyway, me included. I'm going, whoa, 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 wait a minute, hold on. And I'll just be straight up. I mean, like, because I don't have a problem talking about politics. It's like, wait, how come all these people that I respected, that are talking about Jesus and love and everything that Jesus that represents and everything I believe about the Bible, now they're going, Donald Trump is our savior and he's going to make America great again. And I'm looking at Donald Trump and I'm going, this doesn't line up. And so there's that moment where I'm like, whoa, whoa, let me check the GPS. And that's where that deconstruction, I think, if you think about where did it come from, you see those two things, you go, I don't recognize this, or I need to hit the brakes, or I need to pull over and ask for directions, or I need to check the GPS before we keep going. And then that's where that, the big sense of deconstruction happened. But it's happened before. If you're someone that knows the name Brian McLaren, if you know Rob Bell, if you know any of those authors, I would even go back as far as to say Rich Mullins.
Mullins. Yep.
You know what I mean? Like those were pieces, and others are going like it was back when C.S. Lewis was talking. Yeah, like even C.S. Lewis. Like there were people that were
People have been deconstructing since the cross.
yeah. And then I mean, again, your Lutherans are going to say Martin Luther was the original deconstructionist. Like, okay, keep going. Like it's happened throughout history where
This is not a new phenomenon.
Yeah, the church gets to a point where it oversteps or it aligns with something
I'm
or
coming back to the heart of worship.
yeah,
It's
okay.
all about
Eric,
you.
Eric, side note, isn't the point of that song the heart of worship? I was always told that the story of that, because somebody would always like say it before they sang it, was like this dude said no singing for a year, and then how did he come out from the no singing for a year? Oh, I'm gonna monetize by writing a song about coming back to the heart of worship, and I'm gonna
It's
use the
all
story.
about you.
It's all about you, but buy my CD, buy Wow 3 Jesus. That's probably on Wow or I Worship 2. You guys remember that? I Worship and Wow.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Wow, because they already had Now. That's what I call music.
Yep.
And then Wow is like Wow Worship.
Oh my
Christians,
goodness.
man.
All right. Moving forward to the other side of the tension, because where this pendulum has swung is many who have gone through this most recent deconstruction process are ending up deconverting from their faith. And there are a few things that can happen that leads to this. They take an honest look at the Bible and they find answers that make sense to them, that leads them to believe that the Bible isn't trustworthy. Because if we're honest, there are scholarly questions about the Bible that don't have answers, or they don't have great answers. And there are scholarly questions about the Bible that have answers that make sense in either direction, if you want them to. I can argue both sides of many of these questions. It's a 2,000 to 6,000 year old book that's been passed down first orally and then written down in primitive languages without a printing press and then translated and transcribed thousands of times over and over and over and over until we get to where we are today. So there are going to be questions about it.
The other thing is it's been understood differently by every audience that listened to it. You know, I mean, like you dig into it and you go, what were the first people that heard the creation story? Did they assume that was allegorical? Probably, maybe. You know, when you hear about David and Goliath being a huge giant, was that allegorical? Maybe. You know what I mean? Like these different groups might have heard it and understood it to be different than what we do here, because certainly they wouldn't have inserted, you know, America into these different stories. So not only was it written and translated differently, but based on the context of the receiver, it would have been understood and
Yes.
assumed differently as well.
And we're actually doing an entire episode on that later this season that I think if you like this show, you will like. I'm reading a book right now. I've been reading it for a while because I'm taking it slowly, called Misreading Scripture with Individualistic Eyes, talking about the difference between our individualistic American culture versus the collectivist culture that the Bible was written to, that is around the world, some of the things that we miss with that. So yeah, there are questions that are going to be hard to answer, or that can be answered ambiguously, where whichever answer you want to have happen or want to be true, you can claim to it and have a pretty good sense of like, yeah, okay, I feel comfortable believing that. And that has led some who, for many reasons, they don't want to be associated with Christianity anymore. That's led them to deconvert. The other side of this is that there are some who have experienced some type of hurt from Christians, and they can't reconcile what the people who claim to represent God did to them and a God who is supposed to love them. And this can be legitimate abuse, whether it's sexual or spiritual or emotional abuse, or it can be just from Christians being jerks, or anywhere on that spectrum. But ultimately what happens is people, they have taken a look at where mainstream evangelicalism has gone the last 7 years, and they can't reconcile those people with the faith they claimed, and they end up walking away.
Yeah. And I think in some cases it is, and I don't want to make light of these words, but let's think of it this way. It's a traumatic experience. They've experienced some sort of emotional or physical, you know, sexual, whatever, trauma from the church. And again, it feels like this is like a TikTok buzzword, but the trauma response is kind of what you said, where it's like, oh man, I need to completely reject everything that has to do with the source of the trauma. So I'm going to completely deconvert.
Hey, and
And
Eric, let me
that's,
interrupt you real quick. Let me interrupt you
yeah.
because that word trauma can be a dog whistle, or it
Mm,
can be something that makes people say, well, everybody's just so, they claim everything's trauma in today's culture. It's because we now have a word for what a lot of us experience that we used to not have. And
right.
the base definition of trauma is a deeply distressing or disturbing experience. So
Yeah.
if you hear the word trauma, it's not some new thing. It's just a new word that we have a definition for in today's culture.
Yeah. And it's
So
not
when
some
Eric
woke
says they
Gen
experience a
Z
trauma,
neolib thing.
yeah, they experience a deeply distressing or disturbing experience.
Yeah. Something that said, I don't like this. I mean, even let's break it down. You're going to eat something and
Let's
it's way
deconstruct it.
let's deconstruct the analogy. Yes, thank you. You eat something and it's way too salty, or it's supposed to be hot and it's cold, or you know, it's something you don't like. And immediately, or think about your kids when they put something in their mouth that they don't like, and all of a sudden, and your reaction is to spit it out.
I got one for the Southerners.
Let's hear it.
You think what you're going to drink is sweet tea, and it
Mm,
is unsweetened tea.
yes. Or it's not sweet tea, it's just regular tea that's got sugar in it. Oh man. My wife's kind of particular on that. She's like, do you guys have sweet tea? And they go, no, we have regular tea, but we can give you some sugar packets. She's like, no, sorry.
Or you
Anyway,
think it's going to be Dr. Pepper, and it's Diet Dr. Pepper.
not good. So your reaction, there's a reaction to that. Something happens where it's like, this isn't what I expected. This is not wanted. And so for some people, that reaction is to spit it out, is completely wholesale reject and deconvert, and I can't have anything to do with it. And that's their defense mechanism to protect them from the bad experience that they had. The other side, which, you know, I'm not justifying that either one is right or wrong, but this is another way of protecting yourself, which is I need to know the truth. Because a lot of people come to faith, they're I would argue are manipulated to faith because of this idea of blessed assurance of like, I just want to know the truth, I want to hold on to the truth. So then when something negative happens in the church, or when somebody represents it wrong, it represents it to them in a way that they don't like, now all of a sudden I have to be right and I have to know the truth, means I'm going to wholesale reject it, and I'm going to go from deconstruction to atheism now, and I'm going to be a hard and fast atheist, because I can still, like we talked about on previous podcasts, I can still hold on to my sense of self-superiority, self-righteousness, my need to be assured in the truth. I'm just putting a different spin on it. Now I know beyond the shadow of a doubt God does not exist. The Bible is false. Christians are just praying to Sky Daddy. Whatever you hear from all these atheists on online, especially the former evangelical atheists. Those are the worst, because then it's like they're using that same mentality that kept them safe and secure within faith, within religion, and now they're using those same moves just on the other side.
Okay, I want to take what you just said, and I'm going to give us a little bit of like housekeeping real quick, because what you're saying transitions perfectly into how do we live in this tension between deconstruction and deconversion. And one of the things that we're going to get to, we've got 4 points here of how we live in this tension. And one of the points, I just want to jump straight to it because it goes with what you're saying, is we have to recognize that extremism is extremism. And we can easily go from the fundamentalism we grew up around from a religious perspective and turn it into a fundamentalism against Christianity. And so,
Mm-hmm.
one of the things, if you're wanting to live in this tension between the two, if you want to deconstruct some of the stuff you grew up around, but you don't want to leave your faith, is you have to decide if you're deconstructing the toxic environments you grew up around while
Mm-hmm.
trying to find Jesus, or are you trying to leave the people who hurt you and are doing things that you disagree with?
Yeah.
And that's a question you have to ask, because the answer to that question oftentimes will end up directing where you go on this pendulum.
And let me throw out an analogy, okay? Because I think this is how it relates. Let's take religion out of it. You're a parent now. You are a parent, and now as you're going through the parenting process, you start to think through the things that you were just naturally going to do as a parent because that's what you grew up with. Oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and then all of a sudden you hit a moment where you go, "Wait a minute, I don't have to do that as a parent. Why did my parents do that?" And then you go, that was actually kind of hurtful to me. I don't know that I like that. I really actually, I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to subject my kids to that. Here's your reaction. This is what we're talking about. If you're going to deconstruct while keeping Jesus, that would be like saying, I love my kids and I still want to be a parent, but I want to make sure that I'm deconstructing and taking away some of the bad, or I don't know. I don't want to say bad because for some of you, you're not going to say your parents were bad, but like some of the
Unhealthy.
things that like, yeah, your parents did that you choose not to do for whatever reason. Your parents did, but I don't need to do this as a parent. As a parent, I'm responsible to, look out for, feed and clothe and all that, take care of the basic needs for my kids. But I'm not responsible to make sure that that the idea of Santa Claus or elf on a shelf exists for them, right? Or whatever else. Just think about bad things too. So if you're going to deconstruct while keeping Jesus, that would be like saying, I still want to be a great parent. I love my kids. If you're going to deconstruct with the option of deconverting, for me, that would be like saying, oh man, all these things were terrible that as a parent, I don't want to be a parent anymore. Oh, I want to walk away from being a parent. That's a different conversation. And so that to me, that helps me put it in the perspective of like, aha, do I want to still stay uh, connected to the core of what the issue is? Because the core of the issue is parenting. Do I want to parent the way that I was taught, or do I want to parent in a way that makes sense for what's true and what's right, um, and what the core beliefs are of parenting? And that's the same thing for religion. It's like, can I still say, okay, yep, I believe and I have faith and I believe in Jesus. What are the things that that religiously I was taught or brought up with that I don't need to continue because they are not necessary for me or because they were specific to my parents or whatever else. Those sorts of things.
And I think most of us would agree that extremism is bad, that fundamentalism is bad.
Well, most of us, I
That's,
think that's generous.
I would
I
think the
think,
people listening to this podcast, most of them will agree that extremism is bad, either
yeah,
direction.
okay. Okay,
That,
I'm with you.
like, if you're listening to a podcast called Tension
Yeah,
about how to live life between the extremes,
yeah.
you will agree that extremism is bad. And
Or
so there
you're
is
just
a,
hate listening to this. You're just in this and you're just like, I'm masochistically listening to this just so I could get really upset. That's the other option.
and if that's you, this is coming out in early May. The newest season of Ted Lasso is almost done. Go catch up. You need some joy in your life. And we'll talk in a couple weeks when the show ends. And I think you'll be in a much better mood than you are today. So go do that. But extremism is bad. And but you can, if extremism or fundamentalism has its roots in you, it is very easy to take that fundamentalism from Christianity and apply it to whatever the next thing is. Your all or nothing type of thing. So that's one of the tensions we have to live in, one of the things we have to recognize. Another piece of this as we move forward, we have to recognize there is a tension between acknowledging the abuse, the manipulation, the biases, the scholarly questions, all of those things, and living in them. There is a tension between those two things. We have to acknowledge that the questions are there and we have to work through them. Those are good things. But we can't spend all of our time in those spaces. If we live in those spaces and in those questions all the time and not in the work of Jesus and who he is, there's no way you don't end up on that trail to deconversion if you're constantly staying in that world. And I'll give you an example. I recognize that we get a lot of our listeners from TikTok. And if you're listening to this and you're from TikTok, hey, thanks for listening, first off. But you may or may not have noticed that I haven't been on TikTok in your feed since our last season ended. And that's because I recognized the algorithm was feeding me things that weren't healthy for me. I was living in the negative side of deconstruction. That's all the algorithm was showing me. And it was keeping me from living in the truth of who I know Jesus is. And so I'm not saying that we ignore all the issues that modern American evangelicalism has, but what I am saying is we can't live in the disaster porn that has come out of that. Like, you can't, your whole personality can't be the rise and fall of Mars Hill, or your number one website can't be the Roy's Report. Those are great things, and I think they are needed, but we can't spend the majority of our time in them.
It's also bold of you to assume that TikTok is still around at the point that this releases.
That's fair.
Yeah, but to your point, I mean, I'm with you on this. Is that, uh, yeah, you have to figure out what do you actually want to deconstruct, because when you're going through this process, um, this is probably going to seem harsh for some of you, but I think it needs to be said. Is some of you are holding on to and caring more about your extremism and your need to be right, than your need to actually know what's right for you. So like in the deconstruction process, if your highest value, and most of you would never say it, but if your highest value is I need to be a part of an extreme tribe, which is I think where this algorithm conversation goes, is like the only thing you're seeing is the rise and fall of Mars Hill, and then the whatever the Jerry Falwell Jr. the Liberty documentary was. Like, if your only side is the most extreme deconvert to or deconstruct to deconvert language, and that's who you're following, it's like, are you really, is your highest value really trying to figure out the best path for you going forward? Or is your highest value, closed fisted holding on to an extremist group to be able to be a part of a tribe that can look at someone else and say, no, you suck and you're wrong and I'm right?
Well, here's the other thing we know from a psychology standpoint. It takes 10 good things experiencing 10 good things to make up for one bad thing. So if we are living in that quote unquote disaster porn of all of the things that are wrong with the American church, which I am glad they have been exposed. I am glad the SBC stuff is getting exposed more and more. And along with Rick Warren, apparently, I hope the people who did those things can be brought to justice. And if there's indictments that need to be had, they should be indicted and face charges. I am 100% in agreement with those things being brought into light. But the algorithm, once it sees you interact with one bad thing, it's going to continue showing you those bad things because it thinks you want that. And where we know from a brain standpoint, brain chemistry thing, you have to have 10 good things to make up for that one bad thing. So if you are living in the bad, there's no way you don't end up on the deconversion side. And it's just like if someone, I'll give you an example. I have a friend who has taken a job that is hard. They thought it would be good, but it's been harder than they've expected. And so they have vented to me. I have a very negative view of their boss right now because I have only heard the negative things about the boss. That boss might be a great mom, a great wife, a great friend, all those things, but I haven't heard those things. So my opinion of them is naturally jaded against them because I've only heard the criticism against them. So if you only hear the criticisms against the followers of Jesus without actually spending time with who he is as a person, then there's no way you continue following him.
Yeah, you just played out what a real life algorithm looks like. You were selected certain information that was delivered to you that was inherently biased, which is, for many of us, which is why, like, in your case, TikTok, it was you took a much needed break from the things of TikTok. For me, like, I can't spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, which seems really silly because, like, most of the people that I work with, my target audience is on LinkedIn, but I cannot. Like, it does not do good things for my brain to read posts from people on LinkedIn, and it just screws with me, and I get a very negative feeling, and it makes me very negative towards the things that I know I need to do. In the same way as, like, a lot of people have had really good advice around marriages on, hey, if you're going through marital troubles or if you have an issue, like, you need to be very careful who you're talking to about some of the problems you have with your spouse. One guideline I heard is, like, never discuss your marital problems with non-married people or with divorced people, because they would have an inherent bias in giving you advice back. And it's like, oh, all right. So, like, the idea is, are you sourcing from the type of people that are for you and for the thing that you are for? And so if you're starting the deconstruction process because you experience something negative, like we talked about, and now you're going to hear from only atheists, we'll say, that's not going to be inherently healthy for you.
Or
And
even
so,
just only people who have a negative view of Jesus and the church.
right, yeah, yep, yeah. So I think it takes emotional maturity to be able to step in and say, like there is a dopamine hit when someone else agrees with you. And so if I'm upset, like, again, if I'm going to come to Jonathan, I say, Jonathan, I'm upset about this thing, and I tell him about a bad situation that happened, and if he said, and if he, in a rational mindset, said, man, that does sound tough, but, like, did you maybe think that maybe you were being a jerk in this case? I'm gonna be like, yeah, you know what, F you, Jonathan. Like, I don't want to hear that. As much as I need to hear that, I don't want to hear that, because I want to be upset, and I want people, my deep seated feel, all of ours, is we want to be validated in the feeling that we have, and we don't want to see an opposing or even a rational, even sided, tension, gray area approach to it. But it takes emotional maturity to take a deep breath, to pull up your adult pants, to put on your shoes, and to go, like, okay, I'm going to walk into this area where it's like, okay, maybe I need to hear, just like we talked about in last season, maybe I need to hear some of these things. I'm like, okay, where do I have it wrong? What do I need? And, if you go to therapy, especially if you're in, like, relationship therapy, it's like, one of the principles is, what do I need to own in this situation before you can think about talking about the other side. What is it that I need to own? And as soon as I can acknowledge and admit that, that's going to have a much healthier view moving forward into what the quote unquote other side should own. So in your religious deconstruction, it's like, okay, in some cases I had to go like, where have I benefited from some of these dangerous things? You know, because the power that's inherent in the leadership of a white male and evangelical church, did I benefit from those things? Yes. And now I'm upset by it. Oof. Okay. And until I do the hard work of going like, yep, okay, I was part of conversations where we made decisions that maybe weren't in line with what what I believe Jesus would have wanted. Okay, I need to own that first before I can start stepping into being upset by it or upset by what the church said. I don't know, maybe I'm off on that.
No, I don't think so. And I think it actually leads us to where I wanted to go next. Because if we're not going to live in that negative space all the time, we we have to go to the actual source for yourself. You can't just be living off of the experiences of other people. And one of the biggest issues our society has in general is most of us rely on secondary sources for most of our answers. I'll give you an example. We don't watch straight up news anymore. We watch news commentary to find out what happens in the news. We read highlights or we watch highlights and read recaps to find out what happened in the news and the sports. We don't watch the actual games anymore. We watch the highlights. We listen to other opinions in order to form our own. We don't actually go to the source for those things. That's how your extremist news media on both sides have gotten so popular because it is opinion based things as opposed to fact and direct source things. So, having secondary sources can help you get a better understanding of a thing, and that's good. But you need to consume the actual unbiased source for yourself. And if we put that in this conversation, you need to be spending time in your Bible on your own, not just relying on your pastor or your deconstruction influencer or your evangelical influencer either. You need to be reading it to find out what it says for yourself. There's so many people who grew up in the church who never read the book for themselves. That's why the joke is that more atheists know the Bible than Christians. You have to actually go to the Bible. You have to spend time with Jesus and the Holy Spirit, interacting with them, and not just podcast detailing stories of people who use Christianity for personal gain. And here's the thing, I love that you're listening to the show. I love that you're watching a clip from it on YouTube or on TikTok or wherever the next thing is once TikTok is banned. But if your primary discipleship form is from two dudes you've never met on the internet, that ain't healthy.
The other aspect of what you're talking about on our secondary sources, if we're being honest, is not only do we like secondary sources because it's quick, it's easy, you get the summary, but many of us, I mean, I don't want to assume it's you, but I know it's me. I will seek out and I will accept a secondary source that validates my previously held belief.
Even if there are secondary sources that have different opinions than me.
Yes. So I mean, like, I will go out and it's like I I will find a secondary source on a topic that I care about, and it's like I'll search through, and if it's like they don't agree, they don't agree, they don't agree, it's like rejected, rejected, rejected. Now somebody that agrees with my opinion. That's who I'm going to read. That's who I'm going to listen to. That's who I'm going to quote. I'm going to ignore the other sides. I mean, obviously that's being a little bit hyperbolic on that in extreme, but that's the other part of the secondary source issue. Is the problem is you're going to look at things that validate what you want to be true because you say, oh, there's someone else out there that has a perspective that agrees with me. And just like you said, until you actually like, okay, let me read the original for myself and then approach secondary sources. Because of course, am I a biblical scholar that knows all of the intricacies of first century Hebrew, Greek, or Aramaic? No. So should I take the input and advice of people that are. Yes.
I have a degree from a seminary, and I am still not smart enough to figure this stuff out on my own. I have years of experience, and I still need secondary sources. I need people to help me understand who know better than me. But I cannot rely on those people first. I have to go and spend time with the Holy Spirit through the words of the Bible. I have to read it for myself. I have to try to understand it first by myself and then go to people who I trust, as opposed to taking the stories of other people and weighing that above anything else. Like, I love some of the people on TikTok who explain the history of the Bible. Um, I wasn't sure I was going to go here or not, but I'll go here. Dan McClellan,
Mm-hmm.
he's brilliant,
Mm-hmm.
but he has biases.
Sure.
And his word is not the end all be all for all things biblical scholarship. But have I learned from him? Absolutely. Has he said things that has been different than other people who I've heard and trust? Yes, he has. And so there has to be this balance between secondary sources and the actual thing that we read, because we're not going to know everything. And we're going to be able to find a secondary source to justify whatever we want to justify. And unfortunately, in our society, that's what we've all started doing. But, and this leads to the last thing I wanted to talk about today. At some point, we have to decide if having faith is worth having faith, because having faith in something is going to require faith in it. I know that sounds circular, but we're never going to have all the answers about anything. There are some things we can trust more than others, but if we're honest, there are always questions about everything. A lot of people point to science and say that science has no questions. And I love science. I trust our scientists. I am all about the scientific method. But the entire point of the scientific method is that we're always testing hypotheses and looking to see if our assumptions are right. And then as more data comes in, we continue to test and weigh it, and our understanding of the information can change as we learn more about it. That doesn't mean that the data or the actual facts changed, only how we understand it. In the same way, religion has questions. We're always going to look at religious texts and try to interpret them as accurately as we can. But as we mentioned earlier, we are living in a highly individualistic society, trying to understand texts that were written to an ancient collectivist society and a culture that is completely different than ours. So
That
at
didn't have
some
the
point,
internet, that didn't have social media, that didn't have like electricity. Think of all the things that we have that completely change our context.
that had totally different views of certain things than we do, and that there are things that were left unsaid in the text because the recipient of the letter knew what was going on, that the letter was talking about, because they were living it. We aren't the recipient of the letter. When Paul wrote to the Ephesians, he's not writing to North Carolina churches in 2023 for me. He wrote to a specific congregation who knew things that we don't know, that so he didn't feel the need to fill every single detail in. So at some point, we have to decide if having questions that you can't answer can be overcome.
And let me put it this
Or,
way. Can I put it this way? Because
yeah,
this is what it is for me. Am I okay with not knowing or not having the answer in something? Can I move forward in ambiguity? And I think that's where my deconstruction journey has taken me to the point where I have to say, I'm okay with not having the answers. Now, some people, wouldn't consider that faith, but that's what I call it. Is like having faith means not knowing the answer, but still being able to walk forward in it. And so there are times where it's like, hey, I don't know the answer right now, but I'm going to keep walking in this direction because I believe that this is the direction I need to go.
yeah, like I don't know some of the big questions in life. And I don't know that I ever will know those, but what I'm going to have trust in and put my faith in is that Jesus is who he said he is and that he is good. And so while I don't understand so many of these other things, I'm going to put my faith in that. And that's going to allow me to still have the questions. And that's going to allow me to realize that, like, even when people are complete jackholes, that that's not Jesus, who Jesus is. So I'm going to follow Jesus. I'm not going to follow the American evangelical church. I'm not going to follow the religious leaders who profit off of me buying their books and coming to their conferences. I may still buy the book, I may still go to the conference, but they are not who I'm following. And while saying that, I do want to acknowledge that there is a type of person who struggles with that. You might need to, you might feel like you need every question answered before you can continue following Jesus. And if that's you, I don't want you to hear what I'm saying in a demeaning way, because I know some people genuinely struggle with their faith because there are answers that they don't have questions to. Some have walked away from the church, and some have chosen to continue following despite that struggle. But at some point, if you want to continue following Jesus, whatever you choose, whether it's following Jesus or whether it's walking away from your faith, that's, or your faith in him, that's going to require some type of faith in something.
Yeah, and in some cases, people aren't going to believe this, and they're going to push back against it. But like, uh, you, you believe what you believe is true because you have faith in your own intellect or ability to discern. So even if you're like, no, that's an observable fact, it's like, great, cool. But your interpretation of what that applies to your life and what that means is an exercise in faith in your own intellect and ability.
And that's something you're going to have to decide on your own. I hope that you stay with Jesus. I hope that you're able to deconstruct the bad things of evangelicalism and continue following after God. I think that's the best. I believe that's the way. I understand those who have different views of that. I empathize with that. I disagree with that. So, my hope, the whole reason we do this is so that we can tear away the things that are bad about our faith or that have been bad about the applications of our faith, but continue following Jesus together, even in the tensions that make it hard. Eric, you got anything else?
That's it. I think the whole season is going to be about being comfortable living in the tension. And so when it comes to this topic, this is probably the most important on, if there's nothing else I could tell you, is being comfortable with not knowing all of the answers, or being comfortable with walking into some of those things where I don't really have it all figured out, but I'm going to try, and I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to be open-minded enough to know that if new data and information comes out later that changes my mind, that I'm emotionally mature enough to make that adjustment without shame, regret, or causing me to stop and stumble right now.
And if that's you, we're going to be with you the whole way, hopefully being a secondary source that you can trust. If you want to reach out to us, Eric is at EricW712 on all the major platforms. I am at Jonathan_Carone on them as well. You can also email us at hello@tensionpodcast.com. Next week, we are going to be looking at the tension between what we know and what we do. The idea that knowledge is power versus our actions are what's most important. And in that conversation, we're going to talk about the missing link between those two things that the church rarely ever talks about. And to give you a little peek behind the curtain, we recorded that episode before this one. So I actually can already tell you that I'm really happy with where that conversation went, and I think you will enjoy it. If you want that in your feed next Monday morning, hit that subscribe button wherever you get your podcast or on YouTube. If you like the show, do us a favor, rate us, review us wherever you get podcasts Subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast app if you haven't already. Share this episode with a friend if you found it interesting. And as always, thanks for making us a part of your day. We'll talk to you again next week.
See ya.